G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, you guys probably know by now that I'm a big fan of Best Fiends, and as you guys also know, true crime and horror is another one of my passions, but even I need the occasional break. So when I feel like I need a bit of a mental palate cleanser, especially during the holiday season when I want to put up my feet after I've eaten way too much, my go-to refresher is Best Fiends. With Best Fiends, you play through an actual storyline, which helps with that satisfying feeling of progression. It's also an awesome brain-boosting puzzle game that is great for downtime. Best Fiends is now my go-to game at night when I'm chilling in bed and I can't sleep, and not to brag, but I'm over 1,000 levels in now and I still can't put the game down. In fact, 30 minutes can feel a lot like 30 seconds with how much fun I'm having. I also love that I can play it literally anywhere that I want without having to worry about using data or finding Wi-Fi. So even when I don't have the internet for whatever reason, I still have a fresh challenge waiting for me to give me that mental pick-me-up. Download Best Fiends free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. About 8 years ago, two buddies and I decided to spend the night camping at Palo Duro Canyon. We're from Amarillo, Texas, so it's less than like 20 miles away. This is the second largest canyon in the US next to the Grand Canyon. And while you may be wondering what kind of spooky stuff we may have run into as young kids of just 17 years of age, this isn't necessarily that kind of story. Instead, us three friends were some of the only around our age that we knew of that didn't indulge in partying. No drinking, getting stoned, nothing of that nature. So of course, we think a perfect getaway on a Friday night would be the canyon. But we didn't even own camping supplies, to be honest. We just went to Walmart and bought some and headed out on a whim. We make the drive and get to the state park at around 5 p.m. We enter the gate and set off to find a spot to pitch a few tents. We pull into this camping site area that has two separate canopies with picnic tables and respective grills for cooking. And in the middle of both canopies, a fire pit. Nobody was there too, so we thought that it was the perfect place to set up camp. We brought some coolers with soda, some hot dogs and hamburgers to grill, and a stereo to jam some tunes to while we just sort of hung out and enjoyed the last few hours of the daylight in the Texas summer heat. After we pitched our tents, a truck with a small camper RV moseyed on into the site. A man and a woman got out and surveyed the area. The man saw us and waved, with that friendly Texan hospitality. We waved back, of course, and went on about our business. We ate dinner and the sun was starting to set. I think it was around this time too that I noticed that the man and the woman didn't pitch a tent, and that they probably just intended on staying in their camper. We built a fire, sat around it with some portable chairs we brought, and I saw the man walking towards us. He introduced himself as Doug and said that he cooked a lot of extra food if we wanted any. We politely declined and told him that we'd already ate, but we appreciate the offer. He said, "Hey, as long as you guys have eaten, it's no big deal." He waved again and set back off to his camp. About an hour later, he comes back with a brown paper bag and he comments on the music that we're listening to, says how back in the 70s he went to all these festivals, and basically just sort of rambles on about how it's awesome that we're so young and still keeping classic rock alive and stuff like that. He notices then too that my friends have guitars and actually yells over to his wife to come on over. At this point, we really don't think anything weird of it. We just didn't know him or his wife, and he was obviously drinking and just invited themselves into our space, but none of us had the spine to say anything to him about it, so we all just sort of sat around the fire trading stories, as much as three 17-year-old boys can with a couple of probably in their late 50s or early 60s maybe. After what seemed like a lifetime of, making up stories with these people we don't know, he starts trying to get to know us on a more personal level. Super polite, but obviously a little drunk. He asks us if we have jobs or if we're in school, and we'll reply. He says that he works at a United supermarket as a stocker and has for the last 15 years. Basically says that if any of us need a job at any time, that if we put him as a reference, he could get us on. He says his full name for us to reference just in case any one of us wants to apply. This is important later as well. And anyways, finally, the wife starts nodding off. All liquored and bundled up, she fell asleep on her chair. Luckily, that was the cue for Doug to get her back to camp and put her to bed. When they walk off back to their site, the three of us sort of look at each other and eye-rolled because we're all just sort of doormats and basically let this stranger come ruin our night. We see that it's close to midnight, so we decided to put out the fire and get ready for bed. Doug trots back over to our site. He asks us if we're here all weekend or not. We told him that we only had enough money to stay for the one night and that we'd be heading back to town in the morning. He said that he really enjoyed the company and that he'd personally pay for us to stay another night if we wanted to. We sort of politely declined this offer and he started back off to his RV. He quickly turns back around though and says, "Remember guys, if any of you need a job, just call up to United Gem on Lake Road and tell them that Doug sent you." We smiled and said thanks, and he left for good that time. That night actually got considerably cold too, and in the end we decided to pack up and head back to our warm beds in town at around 4 in the morning. As we were leaving the canyon, we almost hit a deer and veered off the road. Everyone was okay, but we were definitely shocked because it was so late and we'd basically gotten no sleep at that point. And us almost hitting the deer was practically the climax of our trip to the canyon that weekend, and we all continued back to school on Monday like normal. Now, one of my friends that was with me on the camping trip was actually in my third period class on Monday, and we started talking about how that guy Doug and his wife were pretty cool despite not taking the hint that we didn't care to hang out with them. At some point I asked my buddy if he could remember Doug's last name, and somehow he did, so for some reason I just googled him. And that was a huge mistake. Because guess who was a 10 times over registered sex offender, and you can probably guess the ages of his victims. Yeah, it was him, Doug. This rocked our world completely. We had somehow, some way, just barely escaped the clutches of this monster. And what would have happened to us if we had taken his offer to stay another night? I was so suspicious of this dude as well, and just couldn't get the scenario off my mind that I decided to call the United supermarket to tell the manager that one of his employees was being really creepy to us kids, and that he might want to be wary of the people that he hires. And guess what? Nobody by Doug's name has ever worked for the United. He had completely pulled the wool over all of our eyes all night long, trying to get us drunk to do God knows what to us innocent kids. I guess the lesson for us that night was be careful of who you talk to. I've thought my house has been haunted for a long time now, but recently it's been getting to me a lot more. I've had a few experiences. Normally they'd be pretty big ones, but always happened few and far between. My family lives on an old farm, 15.5 acres, pretty big with forests and a very nice place with 3 main barns. One is the red barn, and we built half of it into an actual house and still use part of it for sheep. It's the newest barn in the area. The black barn is very old and worn down, but we keep extra wood and stuff in there. And lastly, there's the house barn. The house barn is the oldest, over 500 years old I think, and when it was built it used absolutely no nails. So, the first encounter I had a few years ago, it was pretty late and I was about to go to sleep from watching a movie I think. I looked over onto the other couch across from me for the controller, and just sort of watched it turn from being horizontal to vertical and face me. It moved incredibly slowly and it was really odd. Nothing I can really think of that was a large event happened before what I think is the biggest one that I've had. But I'd been trying to sleep, only my mum was home, and I knew that she hadn't left her room when I hear someone try to open my door, like they'd been rattling with the doorknob. My door wasn't shut properly or locked and was easily able to be pushed open. Then, in my mum's voice and perfectly monotone, I hear, "Help, help me." That's what really got to me too, and suddenly it just stopped. I hear heavy footsteps walk around, lights turn on after I know that I'd left them off. The dogs began barking at nothing and getting bad vibes, or suddenly getting super cold in one area. With the history of our farm, I'd have to assume that maybe it's an Amish spirit who died working on the barn or something. But I also have neighbours just down our old gravel road who I happen to be friends with, one of the kids there, and their older sister is apparently an occultist and has done many spells in their house, and recently she apparently let something loose. My main worry is that this could be evil or a type of mimic, as it seems to be attached to my mum, who's heard her name be called throughout the house when she's alone or in bed. And no one who lives at my house calls her by her name. Well, we just say Mum, obviously. I've heard many coyotes almost right outside of my window too, yet the dogs never bark at that, which makes me think they might be scared of it. I don't know, but I would like to figure it out and see if there's even one spirit here or any at all. I'm pretty paranoid about these sort of things and don't want anything to happen, and would be very open to suggestions as to how to move forward from here. For some quick background, my uncle inherited a big old house after his father, and by old I mean like 17th or 18th century house. He lives in an area where I can only imagine flats and new houses are extremely expensive, so instead of buying something new, he and his family adapted part of the house to modern living, installed some form of central heating, renovated it, etc. Most of the house, however, was closed off and never really used. They never needed this much space, it would just cost too much money to take care of that. It just wasn't worth it. My cousin, my uncle's daughter, is just 1 year younger than me, so although they lived quite far away from us, we used to visit them each holiday, just so that we could spend time together. And when we were about 12 or 13 years old enough to not cause much trouble, me and my cousin decided that it was about time to explore this house a bit. It was around that time that we became fascinated with horror movies and ghost stories, so old house with unknown history, surrounded by even more abandoned buildings, was a perfect place to play in. But it was also around that time that we started noticing weird things happening around the house. Like, one time we would see her dog standing just behind a faraway gate, her dog that passed away earlier that year actually, shot by a careless hunter. No neighbour had a dog this big, I can assure you, and we would hear noises in a nearby park while going on a walk in the evening. It could have been animals, I suppose. Does and boars would come around that area often, but we never dared to check. Nearby warehouses for crops, Uncle works as a farmer, were closed in the evenings, but we could often hear loud banging to the door from the inside. We never really checked that either, but one day while trying to make a map of the house, we wandered to the attic and the door would open for us. A door leading to a room that was always closed off with a padlock, because the floor was too unstable to go in there. While we were walking towards it, the door just opened up dramatically, hitting a wall with a loud bang. There was nothing inside. There was no wind that day either that could have opened it like that. But at that, we ran away and told the story to my aunt. She went to the attic with us to check it, but she didn't take it seriously, nor did she believe us. Strangely too, the door when we got back was closed with a padlock on it. We were only gone for maybe a few minutes at most, so how that happened, we still have no idea. Despite all of these strange occurrences though, we were never really scared of the house. Sure, dark hallways spooked us out, and we would always rush to the light switch, trying to fight the feeling of being watched, but that was about it. As time passed, we just got used to the fact that the house might attract weird things. In fact, we would sometimes joke around. It even dropped a hi every once in a while to a ghost from the attic while passing the staircase. It was just a part of living in that house with history, and we just sort of embraced it, I guess. It's not like we really saw anything scary, right? Well, the first and only thing that actually terrified me, until this day, happened a few years back. So my uncle and aunt threw this big family party in the house. My cousin and I were about 15 and 16 years old at that time, which was too young to be a part of the adult dinner table conversations, but old enough to take care of the younger kids. There were 5 of them, all boys, and to entertain them somehow, we came up with this game that we saw in... Well, we saw it in The Conjuring. Yes, the horror movie. Like I said, we enjoyed this sort of stuff. In hindsight, it definitely wasn't the best idea, but if you haven't seen the movie, in this game you blindfold one person and the rest of the people hide somewhere around. The blindfolded person can ask other players to clap their hands and is supposed to find them following the sound. My cousin was the first one blindfolded. Kids scattered around trying to quickly come up with some nice hiding spot, and me, being way too old to hide properly, just walked until one of the ends of the T-shaped hallways and squatted behind the long table. Obviously, it wasn't a very sneaky place to be in, so when we first clapped hands, my cousin appeared from behind the corner and started carefully making her way towards me. The only source of light was behind her, so I couldn't really see any details, just her silhouette standing out from the background. I waited silently as my cousin bent over and walked under the table. There was sort of enough space to walk next to it, so I had no idea why she did it, but obviously the game was on, so I didn't say a word. I watched as she was getting closer and closer to me, basically crawling there, dragging both her dress and long hair at the floor, and I just wanted to laugh because I thought it looked really stupid. When she was really close, I even had this thought of reaching out my hand and touching her. That would really scare her, but in the end I decided that I wouldn't. I don't really remember what happened next too. I think one of the kids got bored and made some sound in another part of the hallway or something, so my cousin turned around and quickly disappeared behind the corner. Someone else got caught in that round, and then we changed the game. The party was coming to an end anyway, but my family was staying there a few days longer. We lived too far away to just come over for one afternoon, so we helped with the cleaning afterwards. My cousin and I were doing the dishes, and during the conversation she mentioned how the kids liked the games, etc. So obviously, I brought up the situation from the beginning. Without thinking much, I said something like, "Man, you look so stupid crawling under that table, you know." Or, "Why did you walk under the table like that?" And I could see how my cousin's facial expression changed, and she just seemed really confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked. At this point, I'm convinced that she's just trying to prank me, scare me, or something like that, so I'm not even worried. It is also an option that she just forgot that it actually happened in the first place. At the beginning of the game, I was hiding behind the table in the hallway, and you snuck under to catch me. I decided to remind her, but she was even more confused than before. "I never walked under any table," she replied. She sounded really genuine, and I could even hear the little bit of nervousness in her voice, but I still wanted to accuse her of pulling a prank on me. But then I noticed something. My cousin had her hair tied up the entire day. Her hair was long, yes, but in the hairstyle that she kept, there was just no way, like absolutely no way, that she would drag it on the floor like that. Which means that it wasn't her under that table. And there was no other long-haired girl in the house, in fact. I still have no idea what I saw back in that day. I'm not schizophrenic, was never diagnosed at least. My depression never gave me any hallucinations or anything. and it wasn't at its peak moment back then anyway. I wasn't on any meds, I didn't drink, I didn't take drugs. It wasn't a shadow that I interpreted wrong. I mean, I was looking at it for way too long, and it was just too close for me to think of it as a kind of mistake. I have to believe that it was real. I don't know who it was or what it was perhaps, but all I know is that I am so thankful that I didn't try to touch whatever it was. The history of the house is one huge mystery to me. I have no knowledge about who lived in it before or what happened there before my family moved in. I'm trying to investigate the matter, but even when I find answers to these questions, I'm afraid that it won't explain the girl-like silhouette that I saw in the hallway that day.